Was an international cultural movement which affected literature and the arts in the first decades of the 20th century. Modernists were against tradition and Western values. They rejected the heritage of classical literature. They interrupted the father to son transmission of classical knowledge, literature, and arts and science. What is left is alienation, fragmentation, and disintegration of all values, some kind of wasteland, a heap of broken images. According to modernism, artists must break with tradition, particularly with religious and political views of the past. Everything in the world is as we perceive it. We create reality by our perception of it. All truth is relative, there is no absolute truth. History is a negative thing, only the present is important. Modern poetry began with imagism, invented by the American poet Ezra Pound. Imagists used clear and precise images, which the poet represents and shows often in very short but effective poems. Pound followed the tradition of haiku poems written in Chinese and in Japanese. These languages are pictographic and replace abstract words and concepts with concrete pictograms. Pound's rules for writing an images poem are the first, direct treatment of the thing, whether subjective or objective. The second, to use absolutely no words that doesn't contribute to the presentation. The most famous example is In a Station of the Metro by Ezra Pound, which is a two-line poem with only objects on the front and no verbs, no action, just a still picture. The title functions as a locator. It tells us where we are. We are in the Paris underground, in a station of the metro. Pound walks through the streets of Paris and sees crowds of people pouring out of the subway. These seem to him to be figures that come from the world of the dead. It is as if the inhabitants of Hades were coming up to occupy what is the world of the living. The Cantos is a great religious poem, an account of man's progress from the darkness of hell to the light of paradise. One of the most famous cantos is With Usura. In this poem, Pound criticizes the American Revolution, which ended up reproducing the British system in politics, in particular by building in the United States the equivalent of that unitary bank, which was the Bank of England, the Bank of the United States. Against all this, Ezra Pound recalls the great struggle of figures such as Thomas Jefferson, who tried to stop this degeneration. After arriving in Italy, after coming into contact with fascism, Pound finds that Mussolini could be the Jefferson for Italy. He wrote about that in his essay Mussolini and or Thomas Jefferson. Pound said that usury is the cancer of the world. Before capitalism, the process was commodity, money, commodity. Now, one can buy in order to sell at higher price, leading to the money, commodity, money. Money becomes capital. The aim of the capitalist becomes the never-ending movement of profit making, without any defined purpose, but making more and more money, which Ezra Pound called usury. Another American is T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was born in Missouri in 1888, then he moved to Paris and to England where he met Ezra Pound, il miglior fabbro, who helped him publish his work, cutting the parts where Eliot seemed like a romantic poet because moderns hate romantics. Eliot wants to represent the spiritual sterility and the absurdity of the modern world. To do this, he used the mythical method, that is a constant parallel between mythical past full of meaning and an absurd present. The objective correlative is the use of concrete objects or images to represent the emotion of the characters. So, the impersonality of the artist. He has to be impersonal. Eliot said that the task of the poet is not to say but to show, not to present but to represent. Eliot's masterpiece is The Waste Land that represents the fragmentation of Western culture. It's set in a post-war Europe, but all the century can be considered a heap of broken images, because all certains are destroyed by Einstein, Freud, Darwin. Um, what's left is a wasteland. In the wasteland, we find many languages like Greece, Latin, Italian, French, and German. The epigraph is written in Greece and Latin, which it doesn't translate with a reference to the Sibyl, probably refers to Europe. The wasteland is made of 5 parts, each with a different title and theme. Each section is dedicated to an element. Part 1, The Burial of the Dead, is about life and death, fertility and sterility. Part 2, A Game of Chess, introduces the theme of sterility, of the sterility of modern life, in contrast with the mythical past. Part 3, The Fire Sermon, is about love, which is presented as sterile sexual desire. Part 4, Death by Water, Eliot describes the decomposition of a drowned sailor. Um, Part 5, What the Thunder Said, um, describes how men, demons, and gods wait for the thunder to speak. The thunder is the fifth element, the spirit, probably God. When the thunder spoke, the Sanskrit word da is interpreted as three teachings: give, be compassionate, control yourself. So the message is clear. The only way to put an end to the sterility of the desolation of the wasteland is open our heart to the others, to be helpful, to give without condition. James Joyce was born in Dublin in 1882. He studied modern languages and traveled to Paris. Then he married Nura Bernacle. They moved to Trieste, where he got a job teaching English. He made friends with Italo Svivo. They moved to Zurich when World War I broke out, and he died in Zurich. Joyce's main works are Dubliners, a portrait of the artist as a young man, and Ulysses. Dubliners is a collection of 15 short stories about people living in Dublin, around a moment that is the Epiphany. An epiphany is the sudden manifestation of a hidden or removed truth, a fear, or a secret wish. After the Epiphany, the character changes his understanding of himself and his mindset. Two of the most important short stories are Evelyn and the Dead. Evelyn is unable to choose. The story of a young woman that have the chance to live to Buenos Aires with their boyfriend Frank, but she hears a song that reminds her of the melody she heard on the day of the mother's death. She promised her mother to look after the house and keep the family together. Um, when she and Frank are about to embark, Evelyn take a decision, but we don't know what it is. The death, the protagonist is Gabriel, a professor and a literary critic. He was with his wife Greta at a Christmas party at Gabriel's house, free and married woman. On that night, Greta hears a song that reminds her about a guy, Michael, who used to sing it and who died for her love when he was 17. Gabriel asked her what did he die of. I think he died for me. Greta's answer is a real epiphany for Gabriel. He has never had anything or anyone to live or to die for. Michael is the only character who dies in the story, but he proves to be the only person who has truly lived. The final scene, the snow falling, proves that it is impossible to distinguish the town for the graveyard. Um, a Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is an autobiographical story of Stephen Dedalus, a young Irish that is Joyce's fictional double. He is a rebel against his family, his religion, his nation. Stephen is the first Christian martyr, and Daedalus escapes the labyrinth using wax wings. Stephen goes on a voluntary exile to France and live his life as an artist. Joyce's masterpiece is Ulysses, where Stephen Dedalus returns to Dublin. He has failed as an artist, now he's only a simple teacher. The story is set in Dublin on a single day, and another Dubliner, Leopold Bloom, suffers from two emotional crises: the loss of his father and of his son, and the infidelity of his wife, Molly Bloom. Stephen, Leopold, and Molly correspond to Telemachus, Ulysses, and his faithful wife Penelope, according to the mythical method, a constant parallel between antiquity and present time. Um, the stream of consciousness technique describes the mental process made of memories, dreams, impressions, sensation, intuitions. It consists of symbols, association of ideas, images, and memories. Um, Another features of the modern novel is the interior monologue. It is in first person with no connection, no intervention of the ordering mind of the narrator, direct access to the mind of the character, thoughts, ideas, feeling. Each chapter of Ulysses tells an hour of the day with the adventures of the three main characters. So James Joyce is a real modern because he used all the features of the modern novel. Another Irish is Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett was born in Ireland, in Dublin. He graduated in modern languages at Dublin Trinity College. Then he worked in Paris as a lecturer. He was influenced by existentialism, by Camus and Sartre. Um, then he moved back to Ireland and became a teacher of Dublin Trinity College. When World War II broke out, he fought in the resistance movement in France. He met Joyce in Paris in 1945. He wrote in two languages, French and English. When he wrote Waiting for Godot, he did it in French, En attendant Godot, and it was an instant success. He won a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969. Samuel Beckett is the father of the theater of the absurd, but we have two main trends: the theater of anger and the theater of the absurd. The theater of the anger, formally, they didn't create innovative plays because their plays were realistic, traditional, realistic plays. They wanted to show the frustration of the younger generation, the frustration of young people who rejected middle class values and wanted to expose to show their unfair situation. Language was direct, it was real, and they attacked the ruling classes and their values, generally capitalism. The theater of the absurd, under the influence of Camus and Sartre, um, is based on the pessimistic view of man's existence. Man's life is totally absurd. Man's life looks absurd after two wars with no religion, no belief. Man is lost. What if one thing is absurd, it means that it doesn't have any meaning at all. Beckett wants to represent the absurdity, the irrationality of human existence. The main themes of Beckett's plays are the sense of man's alienation and the cruelty of human life. Theater of the absurd is not a school, it's just our definition which we normally apply to a group of dramatists. Samuel Beckett's masterpiece, Waiting for Godot, was not written in English but in French. in French as an attendant Godot. In 1953, it was performed in Paris. He himself translated his play into English as Waiting for Godot and was performed in London. The general setting of Beckett's plays is that all the characters are trapped in a situation from which they cannot escape, an absurd situation. In traditional drama, there is a story developing in time, there is a setting in place and time, real characters who move, who act in a definite period of time. Waiting for Godot has no story, no plot, nothing ever happens in Waiting for Godot. On the stage, the characters speak, but they don't really communicate, they don't really act, they don't, re- they don't do anything. All they do is discussing about nothing. For example, they spend their time putting on and off their boots, like Estragon, Gugo, and he puts on his boots and then he puts them off, like Vladimir. Um, or like Vladimir puts on his hat and then he puts it off. In Waiting for Godot, there is no development in time, there is no past, there is no future. The characters never remember about their past. Waiting for Godot is a two act play, but there is no difference. Both end with a young man who tells Vladimir and Estragon that Godot will come the following day. There is no setting in time and place. We already said that there is no today, no yesterday, no tomorrow. Um, there is no realistic setting or scenery in Waiting for Godot. All we can see is a country road and a beer tree. Another two characters are Pozzo and Lucky. Pozzo keep Lucky on a leash in the first act, but in the second act Pozzo becomes blind and then Lucky keeps Pozzo on a leash. Questo ovviamente è un riferimento che potremmo collegare con la filosofia per quanto riguarda appunto la dialettica servo-padrone di Hegel.